Today we're going to go over the use of pastels. Pastel painting is a fun way to act like you're actually using paints, but they're actually in a powdered kind of a form. So there's different types of pastels. You can buy pastels in a large compressed area where they're like big sticks, thick. They're very thick. You can use the corners, you can use the sides for transitions, and you can also use pastel pencils you can use pastel pencils for tight areas, detailed areas. Nice to have a little bit of a combination of both. So what I have put up for you is a little practice sheet so you can start with your pastels. Types of strokes using pastels, and all that means is what direction you use. For example, if it's a large space, you can use the side, and you can take your pastel and get a lot of area done in one time. You can use your fingers to blend, to smooth out transitions so it doesn't look so powdery. You can also use the tip to draw, which you can get some nice strokes also with that. Not every area would you want to blend all the time, because if we were to blend this, unless you want texture to throw through, but a lot of time you will start off in your pictures with a base like this, and then you will build over the top. And some things you will not always blend. It's okay to have some areas that look kind of rough and textured. If you like, you can tap to soften, but it's no need to blend all the time. Only if like you're creating backgrounds and working, and then your textures you might want to leave without blending because it'll disappear on you after you start. Mixing colors. So I always say try to use at least 2 colors in every area, and sometimes people end up using a lot more, but at least it's not just using one solid hue like blue, okay? You want to have a little variation. So you have primary colors here. Here's a primary, a blue. A secondary would be like orange. And then you have another primary, and let's see what happens when you mix. Mixing 2 colors. When you mix 2 colors, when you mix the blue and the orange, you will see that the orange will actually get darker. So if this is a way that you want to make another color darker, you can. If you want to mix just a primary and a secondary color together, now we're getting red-orange. So instead of always just grabbing the color that you actually want to use, try to make some of those colors and mix it in with your palette. Now you can also try this one. I know this, there we go, here's a good yellow. So if we were to take a true primary, I'm just going to use red again. We're going to leave a gap in the middle. We're going to use yellow and red. Now when I mix those 2 colors together, I should make orange. And plus, I should have told you about keeping your fingers clean with pastels. I usually have a damp towel so I can wipe off my fingers. And then I can go ahead and dry them off so I don't get fingerprints everywhere, because you can see how the colors are going to get dirty right away. But you can continuously mix, so if I do it this way also, with a little red on top, I get the combination that I want. You can see the orange is going to merge without always using just a straight orange in your area. You can create value scales. A value scale is something that goes from light and it goes to dark. So you can use pressure, and then as you go along, you might get a little lighter as you progress, and that's just your transitioning. Try to find a clean finger. Let's go ahead and blend. Because I have less pastel on this side, I should get a nice transition from dark to light. Paper towel you can use sometimes for blending, or your finger. If you want to create something darker, always use a darker color on top. And it's always best maybe to try to stay away from black right away. So I'm going to use a little bit of blue and see if I can make that darker, and then mix that right in, and then transition it. You can see what's happening there. The reason why I stay always maybe away from black a little bit, black has a tendency to make your colors muddy. So if you want a darker red, you can actually add a darker color. It could be red, it could be blue, it could be purple, you can add a little brown. And we'll see what happens later when we add black to a color. When you're making a tint of a color, just add a color. A tint is making a color lighter. So if we have an area that, oh, that's a little too dark, well, you can mix a little white over the top, and then when you blend it, you can see what's happening. A tint is adding white to a color. Now a shade is when you add black to a color. So we're gonna do two sides actually. I'm gonna do one side with black, so you can see how muddy it kind of appears. And I'm not saying black is always bad. It's the degree to the amount of how much you add to it. So that is what will happen if you add black there. If we add a darker color, so let's add a red to this. It's not going to look exactly the same, but the color is darker. If you add a little touch of black for some darkness, you can see that you're getting a little different color scheme in there, but you can see the darkness, little touches of black, little touches of red. You can see how the color is almost the same, but a little purer because it has colors in nature being used there. I kind of like that. A value scale, adding black to a white color and blending it so it has a smooth transition of values. So let's take black, and then let's add white to it, go in a reverse way. And creating a smooth transition is when one flows nicely into the other. Right now this all looks the same. So let's build up and see if we can create smooth transitions. And that's just blending. And so it has a smoother transition, it's not jumpy. We'll add a little bit more white down in here. My fingers are getting dirty and running out. There we go. So you're creating a little smoother transition from one to the other. And that's just adding black or white to a color and blending it till you see that nice transition. Here we're just creating a scale, only using one color. Here we're creating the transition so it looks smoothly into one and blended together. Blending two colors. When you're blending two colors, I'm just going to take the blue and the red since they're obviously out here. When we're blending two colors, I always start off light with my pastel. You don't have to start off really dark. You're just going to slowly overlap. Say you want a little violet in your color. Now it doesn't mean, because now the red is kind of dominating, but you can still see the violet. So you add until you get what you want. Then if it is too dark, well then we add a little bit of white to lighten it. If it's not dark enough, well then you add a little black or a darker color over the top of it. So it's a merging of two colors. The next ones are all about texture. Texture is usually applied after you have some type of a value done. So stippling is the use of dots to create a texture. And if you were doing that over the top of something, if you need a texture, like say there's a rock, well, you can add texture over the top. Leave your texture, do not blend it, otherwise it'll disappear. Scumbling is just like making marks. You're just scumble. But it is still illusion of texture. Feathering is one where you might do like lines. You might add more colors. They kind of flow and feather together just like a feather does. Lights and darks, just with lines over the top. Feathering sometimes can be used in grass, like lines, where you're overlapping a lot. A dusting is where you can actually take a knife and you can scrape off a little bit of powder. You can use a Q-tip. I wouldn't suggest your finger. Just use a Q-tip, or you can even dust it on the area and see you can do a dusting. Or you can try it by, let's do a dusting here. There we go, and we tap it in. You can see how it gives it a speckled look. Kind of nice on rocks in certain areas. It depends on what kind of texture you're looking for. Intensity of colors. When you put two colors next to each other, this is what's going to happen. So let's take a red, where we have. The intensity is going to be brighter when you have contrasting colors. Red and green are opposite on the color wheel. So when you put red and green together, they look very bold. When you blend them together, it creates a gray. Yellow and purple. Now my fingers are dirty, so I'm going to try to find a clean one. Yellow. Purple. There we go. When we combine those, yellow and purple are really bright color combinations when they're next to each other. Very, very vibrant. When I blend them, you can see the creation of gray. Now, if you're actually mixing with paint, you might have a little tendency to see some brown, but sometimes pastels kind of react a little differently. Blue and orange are opposites on the color wheel, so they should be really bright next to each other. Grab myself an orange. Here's the orange, very intense, and then when you blend them together, you should get an illusion of gray. So you can see the different color combinations, you can still see the colors in there. And then when you're ready for your painting that you're going to do, after you select your subject, you're going to take a drawing board, just a wooden board, and a piece of paper. Sometimes colored papers work nice for pastels. You can use gray bogus paper, just white paper too. Sometimes the color I like to use, because then I can utilize that color coming through my paper, has something for me to work with. One side is going to be smooth, one side is going to have a lot of texture. So let's use my dirty finger. When you do your pastel, you might see a lot of grainy surfaces. So let's check the other side and see what it looks like. This side, a little bit smoother. Okay, so you pick out your smoothest side. We are going to tape a border around that picture. Maybe. Now I'm not going to do the whole thing for you, but what you will do is find about half, and usually you can see through it, and then tape that, and you're going to do around the whole entire perimeter of your paper, the entire perimeter all the way around. Then you'll sketch with your pencil, whatever you are sketching. I'm just going to put a line in here. Whatever you're sketching, you will start with, say there's a tree that grows in here, and there's grass down in here. Start with your background, move to your foreground, and then move to the object that, or your middle ground, sorry, and then move to your foreground where everything is in front. Try not to keep on alternating through there. So some variations, like if you're doing a sky, you don't always have to use typical colors. You can use whatever you want. But the good thing is when you're using the side, so say I'm going to do that. Oh, I want it a little bit lighter. So now you can see what happens when it works on colored paper, which is kind of nice. And the blending is really fun with pastels. Really blend it out so all that powder gets into those holes of your paper. You don't want to see just something like that in an area. Don't be afraid to build, like we talked about, more than one color if you want in an area. I'm going to put another color up in here. So now you're mixing your colors. You're going to see what happens. Maybe it's still a little too dark here. Maybe want it lighter towards the horizon. But you can see all your mixing comes into play. When you get down into this area and you're blending it out, you want to put as many colors in there that you see as possible. And then when you're ready for your detail work, this is where all of those line textures come into play. So if this was grass, because you're just using like your feathering technique, maybe you'll use more than one color, of course. More interesting to look at. Colors have a lot of color in grass. This would be obviously more abstract, but it kind of just gives you a general idea of what we're doing. So you're building layers over the top of each other. If this whole thing was done and say it was all completely finished, then maybe my tree then for my foreground area would be right in here. And it would overlap everything. Not that the tree is finished, but you kind of get the idea, so you can get layers in your pastel. So you start from the back and you move forward. So now you're ready to find your first picture, practice through the demonstration with your pastel worksheet, and then you're ready to start.